We found the map carved into a stone, half buried beneath a tangle of roots that looked older than memory. At first, I thought it was a natural formation, a patch of discoloration in the granite. But when I brushed the soil away, the grooves sharpened, revealing lines and symbols arranged with impossible precision. Something about it made my stomach tighten. The forest around us, ancient, gnarled, and impossibly dense, suddenly felt smaller, as if the trees themselves were leaning in to watch. Mara knelt beside me, her breath misting in the cold. "Do you see it?" she whispered. She traced the carved lines with a gloved finger, her movements hesitant, reverent. The map was crude in some ways, simple paths and dots, but precise in others, with a place marked at its center that didn't exist on any map we had studied, not in the old survey charts, not in the satellite images. The symbol was a triangle with a small circle inside, surrounded by a spiral of lines. "It's a location," she murmured, "but I've never seen anything like it." I felt a ripple of unease, not at the map itself, but at the forest. The air had grown still, unnaturally so. Even the birds were silent. A wet rustle in the underbrush made us both start, but nothing emerged. It was as though the forest had exhaled and held its breath. I shivered, pressing my palms into the rough stone, feeling its coldness seep into me. Time seemed to wobble. The light through the canopy dimmed and brightened in inconsistent pulses. That night we camped near the stone, unable to tear ourselves away. I set up a small fire, its glow tentative against the encroaching darkness. Every crackle of flame sounded loud in the thick, damp air. Mara traced the map again, whispering its lines as if reading an incantation. Shadows stretched and twisted around us, not in the firelight but beyond it, between the trees. I thought I glimpsed shapes. Lean figures crouched among the roots, but when I blinked, they were gone. We tried to leave the next morning, but the forest had changed. Trails we had taken yesterday twisted into unfamiliar angles, roots rising where none had been. The map we carried in my backpack, the rubbing we'd made from the stone, seemed to pulse with energy, the lines faintly glowing in the pale light. Mara noticed first that the paths on our rubbing didn't exactly match the stone anymore. A new branch had appeared, leading from the triangle to another symbol, a crescent, faint and almost invisible. "We didn't add that," she said, voice tight. The air smelled of wet earth and decay, but beneath it was something metallic, coppery, tangy. I could feel it on my tongue, sharp and alien. The forest seemed to rearrange itself around us, or perhaps it had always been this way, and we were only now seeing it correctly. The trees leaned closer when we passed, branches forming shapes that suggested eyes. Whispers seemed to crawl along the bark, low and unintelligible, but unmistakably deliberate. By the third night, the phenomena escalated. Our compass spun erratically. The sun rose and set at disjointed intervals. At the stone, the map had changed again. Lines shifted slightly when I wasn't looking, paths erased and redrawn, the triangle now radiating concentric circles that were not there before. Mara swore she saw a path extend into the undergrowth where no trail existed. We followed it, hearts hammering, our steps muffled on moss and loam that seemed to swallow sound. Every snap of a twig echoed like a gunshot. That path led us to a clearing unlike any we had seen. A circle of standing stones, each carved with symbols that mirrored those on the map. The air hummed, low and constant, vibrating through our bones. Shadows in the corners of the clearing shifted independently of the firelight. The triangle symbol from the map corresponded to a depression in the center of the clearing, a shallow pit filled with water that reflected the sky, though the forest canopy should have blocked it entirely. Mara bent to look into the water, and I saw it too. Not our reflection, but something moving beneath, pale and faceless, limbs long and spindly, eyes impossibly black. It mimicked our movements with a deliberate delay, a grotesque mirror. We ran, but the forest no longer obeyed the rules we knew. Paths looped upon themselves. Familiar landmarks appeared where they had not existed. The sun hung low in the sky for hours, then vanished entirely. Sounds became unhinged. Footsteps echoing where there was no one. laughter that did not belong to us, soft murmurs repeating our names in voices slightly wrong. Mara began talking to the trees, whispering apologies and explanations, as if acknowledging their awareness could placate them. I did not respond, but I felt the same compulsion gnawing at me. At the stone, we discovered another alteration. A new symbol, a series of intersecting lines forming an X across the triangle. The map was a countdown, I realized, a guide not to a place but to an event or to an awakening. The forest had intelligence. It had been waiting, patient as centuries, for someone to notice. That realization chilled me more than any shadow or shape. On the fifth night, the presence made itself fully known. It emerged from the trees, a form that defied structure. Tall as oaks, yet thin as reeds, its skin bark-like, eyes hollow and blinking with inner light. It moved in segments, limbs folding and unfolding impossibly, the spiral of its movement echoing the map's carvings. The clearing was silent except for the low hum that seemed to issue from its form. Mara fell to her knees, clutching the map to her chest, tears streaming. "It wants to show us," she whispered. It did not speak, yet the map trembled in my hands. Paths reoriented, the triangle splitting into three, pointing toward deeper parts of the forest. The air thickened, pressing down on our lungs, bending time. Minutes became hours, hours became moments. I felt my mind stretch thin, understanding both too much and too little. The creature, or the forest itself, was folding reality, drawing us toward the center of its design. I glimpsed the pit again, in the clearing's center. The water was no longer reflective. It was opaque, black, and rippling as if the universe itself had pooled there. Shapes swam beneath, countless faceless forms, all echoing the movements of our party. One reached up, through the water, its fingers brushing the surface in deliberate imitation of my own. The map burned in my pocket, lines glowing bright as though in warning or greeting. Mara urged me forward. I wanted to resist, but the forest had already claimed our will. Each step toward the center felt like stepping through memory and dream, past and future interlaced. Our shadows lengthened in ways that contradicted the sun, merging and splitting, forming the spiral symbol that repeated in the carvings. The presence followed, observing, patient. When I reached the center, the pit seemed to inhale me. The water's surface rippled and solidified, forming a mirror of the map itself, three-dimensional, alive. The triangle no longer represented absence but occupancy, the forest's domain, previously invisible, now undeniable. A voice whispered in my mind, neither male nor female, neither old nor young. "We have waited. You have found what cannot be lost." I looked at Mara. She was gone. Only her shadow remained, crouched beside mine, unmoving. The forest had taken her, or perhaps she had been part of this all along. The stone map, now floating before me, carved itself anew, adding symbols that I could not yet comprehend. It was not a map for humans. It was a registry, a ledger of attention, of existence, of claim. I understood then, the forest does not merely house entities, it is the entity. It bends reality, marking those it desires, reshaping time to draw them in. The place that didn't exist was real, and it had been waiting, carved into stone long before we walked these paths. I wanted to run, to flee, but the stone hummed in my hand, lines vibrating like the heartbeat of something eternal. I felt my consciousness stretching thin, blending with the forest's perception, and I realized with a slow, crawling terror that I was no longer entirely separate. The last thing I saw before the world folded was the triangle splitting again, the spiral expanding outward, encompassing everything, the trees, the sky, my body, my mind. The forest had recorded our presence. The map had been more than a guide. It had been an invitation, and now we were part of it. The forest had never felt so alive. Not alive in the way of birds or wind, but aware, watching. I knew it the moment we crossed the boundary marked only by a shift in light. The sun's warmth seemed to falter among the thick canopy, and the air grew viscous, almost reluctant to move. Leaves whispered in a language we could not understand, brushing against each other like muted hisses, though no breeze stirred them. We had set out in the late afternoon, two friends and I, with backpacks too heavy for the narrow trail. I remember thinking how ordinary the beginning had been, the usual crunch of foliage underfoot, the faint tang of pine resin. But as we progressed, the forest's geometry began to distort. Trees shifted imperceptibly when we weren't looking. Roots appeared where the path had been smooth moments ago, and shadows pooled with a density that felt intentional, almost possessive. Caleb was the first to notice it. "Did the moss move?" he asked, stooping to examine a clump that had been a vibrant green, now wilted as though it had been drained of moisture. When I looked again, it seemed restored, glistening faintly under a sunbeam that had no right to reach the forest floor here. I wanted to dismiss it, chalk it up to fatigue or the way our eyes deceive us in dim light, but unease had settled like a stone in my chest. By evening, the anomalies had multiplied. The echoes of our steps warped unnaturally, footsteps ahead mimicking our own even when we paused, and distant rustling punctuated by silence. Too deliberate, too synchronous, suggested a presence that mirrored us with intent. Shadows seemed to ripple independently of the fading light, stretching in ways that defied geometry, pooling around roots and trunks, then retracting when we glanced directly. We decided to make camp in a small clearing, surrounded by ancient oaks and pines whose bark seemed etched with patterns almost symbolic. The ground was littered with thick layers of decaying leaves, the scent sweet and heavy. As we set up our tent, a chill seeped into the soles of our boots, a creeping cold that had no source. Caleb shivered and muttered about wet roots beneath the leaves, but the forest gave no response. No snapping twig, no rustle, only silence, thick and listening. Night fell faster than it should have. The fire we built struggled, flames licking the damp air and sputtering against some invisible dampness. Shadows danced, but they did not belong to us. I noticed shapes in the undergrowth, elongated and low, almost crouching, vanishing when I blinked. Every few minutes, there was a snapping sound beneath the canopy, like fingers pressing against brittle twigs. And then came the first true terror. A cold hand grabbed our ankles from beneath the leaves. I screamed, stumbling back, and Caleb yanked at his leg, eyes wide in the firelight. The touch was icy, impossible, a suctioning weight that tugged at the soles of our boots, curling fingers around them with a deliberate, inhuman strength. For a heartbeat, I imagined it a prank or a trapped animal, but the chill penetrated my bones, and I felt it twist and writhe as though alive, a consciousness beneath the rotting forest floor. We scrambled upright, hearts hammering, breathing sharp and ragged. The leaves lay still again, smooth as if untouched, but the echo of that grip lingered. I remember noticing the way the shadows shifted just beyond the firelight, as if they were waiting. We tried to laugh it off, nervously, but our voices sounded thin, uncertain, swallowed by the vast, sentient black around us. The forest did not allow sleep. Every rustle, every whisper of leaves, was a language we could not decode but understood in instinctual terror. Occasionally, faint echoes of voices, ours perhaps, or ones we thought we recognized, drifted from the dark, distant yet immediate, asking questions we could not answer. I felt eyes on me constantly, not hidden creatures but something far older and more knowing, observing, calculating. By midnight, disorientation had set in. Compass readings wavered. Familiar landmarks appeared to have moved or vanished entirely. A gnarled tree we had passed hours before now loomed beside our fire as if grown in place. Caleb began muttering about being watched, pointing to patches of darkness that thickened with movement just beyond comprehension. I tried to shake the feeling, but the cold persisted, not just at our feet, but curling up our legs, climbing slowly like liquid ice. We huddled together, trying to sleep on the thin mats of leaf litter, when it began again. The hand returned, brushing at ankles, tugging gently but insistently. At first it seemed singular, then multiple, dozens of icy fingers spreading beneath the leaves, pushing up through roots and detritus. The pressure was not uniform, it had thought behind it, seeking, prodding, testing our response. I remember Caleb screaming as he felt a grip on his wrist as well, as though the earth itself had grown hands to restrain us. Then the forest began to speak in its own way. Leaves whispered names, our names, in impossible harmonics, sometimes backwards, sometimes drawn out unnaturally long. Shadows danced along the trunks, bending toward us and then away, forming shapes that suggested arms, torsos, faces. But no matter how closely we looked, we never saw anything tangible. We were trapped in a space both familiar and alien, a forest that could fold upon itself, erase paths, and bend time. Hours, or was it minutes? Passed. Reality began to fracture. I swore I saw our fire reflected high in the canopy, a second blaze that mimicked every flicker and movement, though there was no logical way for it to be there. The cold hands were patient now, no longer just tugging but brushing against our calves, our elbows, tracing along our ribs with an almost gentle curiosity. And then, impossibly, they began to whisper through the dirt, through roots, through the air, not with words, but with intent. We understood the meaning, stay. Morning, or what we assumed was morning, arrived not with light but with the forest drawing a curtain back just enough to see. Our supplies were gone. The trail we had followed seemed to spiral inward, returning us perpetually to the same clearing, the same ancient trees etched with unfamiliar symbols. Caleb was pale, shivering, eyes wide with a knowledge I could not share. I realized then that the hand, the tugging, the whispers, were not hunting us as a predator would. They were instructing, guiding. The forest was not a place but a consciousness, aware of our presence, weighing our responses, testing our limits. And when it touched us, it was not with malice but with inevitability. A claim, a marking, a tether to a will older than memory. We tried to run, but each step seemed slower, the air thicker. Leaves shifted beneath our feet, pulling at our soles like gentle gravity, rerouting us in silent loops. Shadows flickered, offering glimpses of impossible forms. Trees bent into impossible angles, roots intertwined into shapes resembling faces. But whenever we reached them, they vanished, leaving only the cold and the whispering. Finally, I understood. The forest had not grabbed our ankles to harm us, but to awaken us, to reveal that beneath every footstep lay its sentience, that each rustle and shadow was alive with purpose. The realization was not comforting. We were no longer simply trespassers. We had become part of its will, participants in its endless, patient calculation. I feel it now as I write this, the words trembling on the page. A cold weight lingers beneath me wherever I walk. Leaves brush my legs with consciousness. Shadows twist to follow me even in the sunlight. And I know, with unshakable certainty, that the forest has claimed me, that it watches from every root, every branch, every whisper of air. The hand that first touched my ankle was never a creature. It was the forest itself, asserting its existence, teaching me to recognize the sentient weave of life and decay around me. We are never alone. The forest does not sleep, and it remembers everything we ever did and everything we ever will.